Hi there, this is Charlie with creatingtrance.com. Today we're going to look at episode 2 in FL Studio, Trance Music Basics. I kind of already have a track set up here, but I'm just going to walk you through all the different elements of trance composition in FL Studio. Up here in the left, in the pattern selector, we're going to go and just take a look at the kick. Very basic beat here. Now I've also created a few other ones, some hat rhythm. And the shuffle that you hear is done by moving this shuffle knob around. Kind of dry, a little more hip hop at that point, but bring it in here and it gets really shuffly. Let's put it back in the middle. Now I have a few other effects in here. Let's see. Kind of a bassy drum effect here. Now notice as I go through these, each one is already set up with a channel. This is a good habit you want to get into. And you do that by clicking on the sample or instrument or whatever you have set up in here, and you click on an open channel strip here. You can right click and link selected channels or do the Control L. Now this one I put a couple effects on. Let's select it here. We'll close the channel settings. We'll go to the Gill Sound Effects 1. And over here on the right I added a stereo enhancer. It kind of sends the phase offset, which sounds similar like a chorus, but there's no modulation underneath it. It just stretches the stereo out. Then I put a delay bank on it. There's lots of different settings in here. Always remember that there are also presets you can play with that will help you get started. Right now I'm just on the default to keep it simple. Go ahead and close this here. Now with the kick, what I've done is I've sidechained the kick to a couple different instruments. The bass line and the reverb bus that we'll take a look at here in a second. But always remember that you can easily set up a sidechain by selecting the appropriate mixer channel here, and then right-clicking on any of the routing buttons to sidechain to this track. This, if you route to this track only, you won't hear it come out of this channel strip. It will cut off the output going to the master and only send it to another track. Sidechaining to this track only allows you to do the same thing. It cuts off the sound, but at the same time it will let a limiter pull it in as a sidechain, which is what the limiters are for. They kind of complete the circuit of sidechaining audio. So if we go into reverb, you'll see in the limiter here that I've selected the compression algorithm, and then I've selected sidechain 1 because I only have one set up. If I were sending sidechains from 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, I would have to change that down here for those to pass through. Pretty simple. Also, be aware that you don't have to turn them up. If you turn them up, you'll hear them come through. Always be aware that you don't have to turn them up unless you want to hear them. All you have to do is route them and use a limiter to pull them in. Let's go to a thick lower bass depth core. These are fun. Pretty heavy. Click on the depth core here. Now notice here in the right, in the mixer, I've kind of EQ'd the low end. I've brought it down a little bit. I can probably even bring it down a little more. It's a pretty powerful instrument we're running. Most of these are Citrus, by the way, just because that's what I love using for trance. You can really use any of the plugins, but Citrus has so many awesome presets in there. All right, let's close that. Just be aware that you can quickly mix EQ per channel. This distant effect kind of has a much crazier EQ on it, as well as a filter that we'll look at here in a moment. Now the one thing that's pretty important is the reverb bus. I'm not using this limiter up here, it's muted. But this limiter down here is also being sidechained from the kick. So that's kind of an all-around track sound that we're going to be playing with. I have the hat going into the reverb channel. I have this sound effect going into it, not as loud. Notice the hat's turned up a little bit more. This gill sound effects is also being routed. The distant channel is being routed pretty heavy. The depth core is also in there, but it's not as heavy. Probably have a few more in here. Yep. The sub bass is going in there, the raspy, pretty much all of these. It's nice when you can create a room using a reverb bus. It still is one of the most important parts of trance production, regardless of what piece of software you're using. Okay, so here in the playlist, let's make this a little bit bigger. I have all these automations set up. For the bass, I have some volume enveloping set up just to control the volume coming in because it's a pretty heavy bass. Even though the kick is sidechaining it, it's heavy. Then I have the depth core volume envelope, which I don't really use it towards the end of the song. It's kind of just an introduction sound. And then I have some filter control frequency envelopes for these chords here. And then I have this effects level here for the kick, which is very interesting to look at, because if you have an effect on a channel that you don't necessarily want to get rid of, you just want to fade it out, the best way to do that is, let's go into the kick here, is to automate this level here. It would just be a simple right click, create automation clip, but I've already made one, and you'll see as I pass over it, it turns down right there. There's also a few other things going on in the mixing board. But using a filter to band pass a kick, not low pass, so I'm kind of holding the band in the middle to this frequency range. Once it opens up, the whole low end and high end will come out. That's kind of the idea behind that. Now let's look at some of the musical stuff. I have these chords for the trance section. I recorded them in and they're pretty far on the right here, but it doesn't really matter because when you paint these into the playlist here, you can just cut the left side of them or move them all the way to the right and then recut them. It's very customizable. These are 6th chord combinations, and I'm playing them from the 6th to the 4th in the scale that I've chosen. These all are in the same scale, and then in the beginning of a song, let's take a look at the bass line here. I keep it kind of flat first. Chords, bass line. So first we sit on F sharp. I can't really hear it there. You can't really hear it there. There it is. We start with F sharp. And then in the second half of the track, we go up to A and then bring it down to G sharp. And kind of just ride those two chords for a while. 4 bars of that. It's a pretty short track. But that's kind of the basic setup of the musical side of trance. Of kind of a flat intro hanging out either on the root or up in the 5th of the scale. And then there's the trance sections that don't have any drums really, and then some more advanced chords come in. These chords of which, these are playing in triplets per bar, so 5 hits in each bar here, and then down to the bottom. And then at the end of the song, I change them around just a tiny bit. If I go to chords 2, there's a little more towards the end, so every 2 bars is a triplet and then goes into 4/4 towards the end. You'll hear the difference. And then to add some space, I took one out of the second tail of the chord structure here. Let's go ahead and close this here. Now the important thing for most trance house, deep house, is to take the bass line and send the kick right through it. Which this sub bass here is what I was using. And again, sidechain 1. Again, you turn your threshold down, turn the ratio up a little bit, and then it's all kind of what sounds best to you between the attack and the release. The saturation stuff might help if it's a pretty dirty sounding synth or bass line that you're trying to sidechain, but just always make sure that you're on compressor and you have a sidechain selected. A lot of people forget about selecting this, and it gets a little frustrating, but once you get the hang of it, it's a walk in the park. The only other thing in here that I'd like to show you is the pitch draws I wrote in. This is kind of a lead instrument. If I draw it out here, there's a couple simple notes here, going up, coming down, all on the same scale, and then some chord stuff. And if I show the channel pitch, I've also done a little bit of pitch bending in here, and you'll hear that come through as the song picks back up into the sixths and the fourths. The only other thing that I have about this Moogish plugin here is that I do have it attached to this channel strip, and the names are different, but that'll happen if you're reattaching instruments to other channel strips. You'll just kind of have to follow along with the naming by hand once you start setting them or moving them around from older spots in the project. Keeping things named and colored, I know I don't have things colored here perfectly, but at least keeping the name conventions straight, that really helps you move around the software a lot quicker. So anyways, I have a Fruity Reverb 2 that I've added, but I have the dry channel turned down pretty low and the wet channel turned up a little bit higher. And then the early reflection channel here, I kind of left in the middle, but I made the size of the room pretty big. Normally comes something like this, and I just kind of cranked it out. There's a lot of other things that you can play around in here. Again, just hover your mouse over it. You'll see a little bit more of a description appear up here in the top and possibly a hotkey on the right. Kind of see how that changes pretty quickly. So go ahead and close that. That's kind of a lead section that keeps the listening parties interested as the trance section evolves. So I think that's enough. Let's play this back and take a listen to it.